Imagine a musician so completely terrifying to the state that a government literally deploys a paramilitary hit squad to stop him.
Right, like we're not talking about a couple of local cops writing a noise complaint here.
No, exactly. We're talking about riot shields, tear gas grenades, axes all, just to shut down a recording session.
It sounds like a movie scene, honestly.
It really does. But this isn't a metaphor for resistance. You're not talking about a pop star wearing like a controversial outfit to an award show to get retweets.
Yeah, this is on a totally different level.
Completely. Yeah. We are talking about an artist whose music was considered such a potent, literal threat to a military dictatorship that they felt the only way to silence the bass line was to physically demolish the compound where it was being played.
Is the absolute definition of taking art to the front lines. I mean, you were looking at a landscape where the music and the militant action just become entirely inseparable.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you are joining us today because we are unpacking the life, the music, and the literal wars of Fela Kuti.
A truly incredible figure.
Yeah, a man who didn't just play instruments. He used them as a shield, as a weapon, and eventually as the constitutional foundation for his own sovereign nation.
Which is just wild to even think about.
It really is. And to really understand how this happened, we are pulling from an incredible stack of material today. Specifically, we've got excerpts from the book called Fela, Kalakuta Notes by John Collins.
And John Collins is, well, he's just such a vital source to have for this specific journey. He offers a perspective that is incredibly rare in historical accounts of massive cultural figures.
Right, because he's not just some academic sitting in a dusty library thousands of miles away, piecing together newspaper clippings.
Exactly. Collins is a naturalized Ghanaian. He's a classically trained guitarist, a producer, and most importantly, he was Fela's actual friend.
Yeah, he was literally inside the compound. He was dodging that tear gas with Fela.
Yeah, he provides this frontline eyewitness account. He's seeing the mundane moments of like making breakfast, but then also the intense creative process of arranging a horn section.
Right, and then the extreme violence of a state crackdown, all from the exact same living room.
What's fascinating here is that Collins's notes give us the granular details of a transformation. They don't just present the finished icon to us.
Yeah, they show us the actual mechanics.
Right, the mechanics of how that icon was built from the ground up.
So here is the mission statement for this deep dive. We want to unpack how a classically trained, clean-cut, teetotaling jazz student living in London transformed into the Black president.
It's quite the leap.
It's a massive leap. From that to a radical Pan-African icon who invented a completely new, architecturally massive genre called Afrobeat, formed his own breakaway republic, and went to war with the Nigerian military.
And to do that, we have to look past the finished product, right? We have to dissect the psychological, the cultural, and the historical mechanisms that turned a young man from Abeokuta into a global force of nature.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to understand Fela the Rebel, we really have to look at the environment that forged him.
It's crucial context.
It is. Reading through these notes, it becomes abundantly clear that Fela didn't invent rebellion out of thin air. He inherited it.
Oh, absolutely.
Fela was born in 1938 in Abeokuta, which is a major Yoruba town about 50 miles north of Lagos in Nigeria. And we really, really need to talk about his mother.
Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti.
Yes, Funmilayo. Because the sheer scale of her influence is just staggering. I mean, to you and me reading this, she reads like a modern-day superhero.
She really does.
But her power came from incredible ground-level organizational genius.
Yeah, she was a titan of Nigerian history in her own right. I mean, long before Fela ever even picked up a saxophone, Funmilayo was demonstrating how to dismantle oppressive systems.
She was a nationalist, right?
Yes, a nationalist and a massive women's rights activist. She actually founded the Nigerian Women's Union.
And the sources note she met Mao Zedong. She traveled to Moscow and was actually the very first Nigerian woman to visit Russia.
Where she received the Lenin Peace Prize, no less?
Wait, she got the Lenin Peace Prize. That is incredible. Oh, and she was the first woman to drive a car in Nigeria.
Right, she was breaking every barrier imaginable, but it's the mechanics of her activism that really stand out here. She didn't just give speeches, She actively paralyzed the local economy to force political change.
How so? Like, what did she actually do?
That is the crucial detail. So in 1947 and 1948, she organized the local Egba market women.
Okay.
At the time, the British colonial authorities were operating through a system of indirect rule. So they empowered the local king, who was the Elik of Abeokuta, to collect heavily unjust taxes from these market women.
And the market women were basically the economic backbone of the whole region, right?
Exactly. They ran the economy. So Funmilayo realized that if you unite the women across class lines, bringing together the educated elite women and the working class market vendors, you basically create an unstoppable force.
Wow.
Yeah, she led mass demonstrations, she utilized sit-ins and collective economic withdrawal. The women simply refused to participate in the economy until the system broke.
And it worked.
It worked. The Elik was temporarily forced into exile, and the entire tax system was overhauled.
That is just, I mean, wow. So you have this powerhouse of an anti-colonial radical mother who literally overthrows unjust tax systems through sheer organizational willpower.
Yeah, that's who is raising him.
And then, sitting right across the dinner table, you have his father, Reverend Alagbon Ransome-Kuti.
A very different figure.
Right. He brings a completely different, almost opposing energy to the household. The notes say he was an Anglican priest, a school headmaster, and a famously strict disciplinarian.
Oh, very strict. But he was also a rigorous music tutor.
Okay, so the music comes from his dad's side.
Primarily, yes.
Yeah.
And this musical lineage goes even deeper. Fela's paternal grandfather, Reverend J.J. Ransome-Kuti, was also an Anglican priest who composed Yoruba hymns.
Oh, wow.
And his great-grandfather was a freed Yoruba slave from Sierra Leone. So Fela is receiving formal, highly structured Western musical training at his father's grammar school. He's steeped in the rules of Anglican hymns and choral arrangements.
But he isn't living in a vacuum. Right? Because Abeokuta, outside the walls of that grammar school, is rich with traditional ancient sounds.
The contrast is immense. Inside the house, while his father is teaching him Western scales, the streets of Abeokuta are just alive with the traditional Yoruba drum and dance music of the Egungun and Gelede masquerade cults.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener, because these masquerades are fundamental to understanding Fela's later stage performances. What exactly are the Egungun and Gelede masquerades?
So the Egungun masquerade is a deeply rooted Yoruba tradition dedicated to ancestral spirits. Visually, it is striking.
The costumes.
Yeah, performers wear towering, elaborate fabric masks and costumes that completely conceal the human form. It represents the ancestors returning to the world of the living.
That sounds amazing visually.
It is, but crucially, sonically, it is driven by intense, overlapping polyrhythms played on talking drums. But the most important part is that the Egungun aren't just religious figures. They serve a social function. They are socially sanctioned to publicly mock, criticize, and call out corrupt leaders or bad behavior in the community.
Wait, so they're like spiritual protest singers?
In a way, yes. And the Gelede masquerade functions similarly, but is focused specifically on honoring the spiritual power of women and female ancestors.
So from the literal moment he is born, Fela's brain is processing this incredible tension.
Exactly.
Inside the house, you have Western structure, strict religious discipline, and the organized political defiance of his mother.
Right.
And then outside the house, you have deeply complex African polyrhythms and the theatrical tradition of using music and performance to publicly humiliate corrupt authority figures.
You can literally see the blueprint for Afrobeat and the Kalakuta Republic being drawn in his childhood.
It is the perfect psychological cocktail. He learns from his mother that authority is not absolute, right? Like, if a law is unjust, you organize and break it.
Yeah.
From his father, he learns the mathematical structure of music. And from the streets, he learns the spiritual and social utility of the groove.
It all feeds into what he becomes.
And you really see that stubborn, immovable will snap into focus in this one amazing anecdote from a musician named Joe Mensa, who knew Fela when they were young.
Oh, the car crash story.
Yes. So Fela was a teenager, and one day he crashes his mother's car.
The famous car.
Exactly. The car driven by the first female driver in Nigeria. He runs it straight into a ditch. Now, I'm trying to picture the fallout from destroying the vehicle of the woman who forced a king into exile.
Right, you would expect a monumental grounding or severe physical discipline, especially given his father's reputation for being strict.
But Funmilayo does not operate on normal parental logic. She didn't ground him. She packed him off to London.
Which is just brilliant.
She just tied her headgear, grabbed his passport, handed him 90 pounds, and put him on a plane to England to study medicine. She essentially exiled her stubborn teenage son to go become a doctor.
Which is a beautiful historical irony if you think about it.
Why is that?
Because attempting to force Fela into the rigid, respectable mold of a medical doctor was the exact catalyst that triggered his total musical immersion.
Right. The second the plane landed in London in 1958, that inherited rebellion kicked in. He decided, against the combined weight of his prominent family's expectations, that medicine was totally off the table.
He just walked away from it immediately.
Yeah. Instead, he enrolled in Trinity College to study formal music and the trumpet.
And it's really vital to examine the specific musical ecosystem Fela stepped into during late 1950s London.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So he formed a jazz quintet in 1961, and then groups called the Highlife-Jazz and eventually the Koola Lobitos. But the Fela of 1958 to 1963 was absolutely unrecognizable from the global icon the world would later know.
See, I'm struggling to bridge the gap here based on Collins's notes.
Yeah.
You're telling me the guy famous for creating the most uninhibited, politically dangerous, fiercely African music of the 20th century, the guy who famously walked around in Speedo smoking massive spliffs, started out as a stiff, rule-abiding jazz purist.
I know, it sounds totally contradictory, but his close friends from that era confirm it.
Really?
Yeah. J.K. Brema described him as a perfect square. Another friend, Bio Martins, called him a cool and clean, non-smoking, non-alcohol drinking teetotaler.
Wow. Fela Kuti, a teetotaler.
Exactly. He was wearing tailored suits. He was obsessively studying classical music theory and strict jazz. He actually looked down on musicians who drank and smoked. He actively lectured them about their bad habits.
So he's essentially acting like a strict schoolmaster of jazz, like a hall monitor for the music scene.
Basically, yes. But the notes show he actually struggled to play the very music he was being so elitist about.
Wait, really? He wasn't good at it?
He had a hard time, and this failure is a very humbling, necessary part of his journey. In London, he was surrounded by incredibly talented West India musicians.
Who were they playing with?
Well, you had guys like Joe Harriott, who was playing blistering, Charlie Parker-style bebop, and Sheikh Keane, who had mastered the cool, intricate stylings of Miles Davis. Fela wanted to play at that level.
Right.
But according to the music journalist Benson Idadoye, when Fela tried to sit in and play with them, he honestly disgraced himself.
Why? What was the technical barrier there? Was he just not fast enough?
It was the improvisation. Fela had the classical, rigid training from his father and from Trinity College. He could read sheet music perfectly.
Okay, so he knew the theory.
He knew the theory perfectly. But bebop jazz requires you to spontaneously compose in real time over complex, rapidly changing chord progressions. Fela's brain was too structured, he couldn't let go and flow with the music.
The king of Afrobeat couldn't improvise. That is wild to think about.
It really is.
And this struggle totally followed him. When he returns to Nigeria in 1963, he comes back as this jazz elitist, right? Playing this heavily intellectual music. But the local audiences in Lagos just aren't connecting with it.
No, not at all. It's too detached from the dance floor.
That's right. He's working a day job as a music producer at the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, constantly getting reprimanded for showing up late, and his jazz sets in the local clubs are just bombing. The crowds are bored to tears.
They wanted something they could move to. He's desperate at this point. He needs a radical reset because he realizes that what the people actually want is high life music.
High life.
Yes. And to understand what Fela is competing against, we really need to dive into the history of high life because Collins breaks it down masterfully in the notes.
Let's do it.
High life didn't start in Nigeria. It's a genre that originated in Ghana, and it is the ultimate example of global cultural collision.
How so? Where did it come from?
So high life's origins trace back to the late 19th century. You have Ghanaian regimental brass band musicians who were trained by the British military at places like Cape Coast and Elmina Castle.
Okay, so they're playing strict military marches.
Exactly. Very rigid, very British. But then you introduce thousands of West Indian soldiers who were brought in and stationed at these forts by the British during the Ashanti Wars.
Oh, wow. So you have Caribbean troops who carry the rhythmic DNA of calypso and Afro-Caribbean syncopation hanging out in their downtime with African musicians who are trained in rigid British brass instrumentation.
That's the exact collision. The Caribbean soldiers show the Ghanaian musicians how to break the strict 4/4 time of the British marches, introducing offbeats and swing.
That's fascinating.
But that's only part of it. Simultaneously, you have the crew sailors of Liberia.
Okay, who were they?
These were African sailors working on British and American merchant ships traversing the Atlantic. They pick up sailors' instruments, specifically the acoustic guitar, and they develop a distinct rolling finger-picking style known as palm wine guitar.
Oh, palm wine guitar. I've heard of that.
Yes. So it all converges in Ghana, and the term high life itself is brilliant sociology.
How'd it get the name?
It was coined in the 1920s, but not by the wealthy elites who were inside the prestigious clubs playing these new ballroom dance orchestrations.
No.
No, it was coined by the poor people gathering on the streets outside the clubs, listening through the windows. It was the music of the high life that they were financially locked out of.
Wow, that is such an incredible detail. So it's named by the people outside looking in.
Exactly. Fast forward to World War II. Allied troops bring American swing jazz records to West Africa. In Ghana, a band called the Tempos, led by the legendary E.T. Mensah, absorbs this swing, mixes it with the palm wine guitar and the Caribbean brass, and creates the definitive high life sound.
And this sweeps the region.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
E.T. Mensah takes his band on tours to Nigeria in the 1950s, and high life absolutely conquers the Nigerian music scene.
So this is the mountain Fela is trying to climb. He is trying to force-feed Lagos audiences this intellectual, London-style jazz, while all around him, the infectious, danceable rhythms of high life are just dominating everything.
Right. He's totally out of sync with his own culture.
And to make matters worse, he's still struggling with his actual instrument. There's this anecdote from Stan Plange, a Ghanaian guitarist who knew Fela in the late 50s. Plange says Fela wasn't a great trumpet player initially because he struggled with his embouchure.
Right. For those who might not know, the embouchure is the specific way a brass player applies their mouth, lips, and facial muscles to the mouthpiece.
It's how you make the seal. Right?
Yes, so to create a seal and produce a tone, it requires intense, consistent muscle memory.
Plange notes that Fela would constantly leave his trumpet at Plange's house, hiding the key under the doormat, because he had to practice every single day. If he missed even one day of practice, his embouchure would fail, and he literally couldn't get a sound out of the horn.
It's almost comical.
Picture Fela Kuti, practically wearing out his mouthpiece, desperately practicing scales just to make a noise.
It really highlights a man who is incredibly disciplined but profoundly lost. I mean, he has the technical training, he's beginning to experiment with blending high life and jazz, but the music lacks a defining soul.
And more importantly, it lacks a conceptual anchor.
Exactly. He is a man without a message.
Which brings us to the tipping point. It's 1969. Fela's band, Koola Lobitos, is struggling. So what does a desperate artist do? He packs up his band and goes to the one place where music and culture are rapidly reinventing themselves. America. They secure a visa for a 10-month trip and end up in Los Angeles. And reading about this trip, it isn't just a tour, it's an intellectual and political lightning strike that shatters everything Fela thought he knew about himself.
It's the turning point of his entire life. Los Angeles in 1969 was a crucible of radical thought. The civil rights movement had evolved into the Black Power movement.
And Fela's entry point into this world was a woman he met, right?
Yes, a woman named Sandra Isidore. She was deeply connected to the Black Panther Party.
She realizes very quickly that this Nigerian musician, despite his obvious talent, is completely disconnected from the political reality of Black liberation. So she hands him a book.
The Autobiography of Malcolm X.
Yes. I want to dig into the psychological mechanism here. Why did this specific book completely break Fela's colonial mindset? What was happening in his head?
Well, you have to remember Fela's entire educational framework up to this point.
Right, the British schools.
Exactly. He was educated in British colonial schools. He was taught to revere Western classical music and London jazz. He was essentially taught that African history prior to colonization was either non-existent or completely irrelevant.
So his whole identity was built on European standards.
Yes. Malcolm X's philosophy centered on absolute self-determination, the violent realities of structural racism, and the necessity of stripping away the psychological chains of slavery and colonialism, including the discarding of slave names.
For Fela, reading about a Black American man reclaiming his identity must have been a shock. He made him realize a terrifying truth. He was an African man, born and raised in Nigeria, who knew absolutely nothing about his own African history.
It was a complete paradigm shift. Exactly how this alters his approach is profound. Malcolm X's teachings provided the conceptual anchor Fela had been desperately searching for.
It sparked his adoption of what he called Blackism and Pan-Africanism.
Right. He realizes he cannot play Western jazz because it belongs to a culture that oppressed his people. He decides he must create something undeniably fiercely indigenous.
It's crucial to look at this strictly through a historical lens, of course. For you listening, whether you align with the Black Power movement, Malcolm X, or Pan-Africanism isn't the point here. What John Collins's notes show us is how Fela used these specific political ideologies as the literal blueprint to dismantle his old identity and architect his new sound. We're just looking at the historical catalyst.
And we see a beautiful historical symmetry occurring here. If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about the transatlantic flow of culture.
Okay, tell me more.
Centuries prior, African rhythms and polyrhythms were brutally forcibly taken across the Atlantic through the horrors of the slave trade. Those displaced rhythms mutated in America, eventually birthing the blues, jazz, soul, and funk.
Right.
Now, in 1969, the political militancy of Black America, synthesized with that heavily evolved soul and funk music, is feeding back across the Atlantic, directly into Fela's brain.
Wow. It is a massive cultural feedback loop. Because musically, while he's in the U.S., he's absorbing the raw, unfiltered funk of James Brown. Specifically, songs like Brown's 1967 hit Cold Sweat.
Oh, that song was huge for him.
Fela listens to that driving, heavy-on-the-one funk rhythm section, and he realizes he needs to fuse that relentless groove with his jazz and highlife roots. He renames his band from the playful Koola Lobitos to the militant Nigeria 70, which later becomes the legendary Africa 70.
And he officially coins the term Afrobeat.
Why did he need a new term?
He needed a new term because he wanted to explicitly distinguish his music from artists like Geraldo Pino.
Who was that?
Pino was a massive star in West Africa at the time, but he was essentially doing straight copycat versions of American soul. He dressed like James Brown, he sang like James Brown.
Oh, okay.
Fela looked at that and said, no, we are not going to be African echoes of American artists. We are going to build a new architecture.
So Fela returns to Nigeria in 1970. And the teetotaling jazz purist in the tailored suit is completely dead. He steps off the plane wearing traditional African clothes. He is openly smoking Nigerian natural grass.
Which he pointedly refuses to call Indian hemp, by the way.
Right, because he argues it is a medicinal plant indigenous to Africa, and he sits down to engineer Afrobeat. And I use the word engineer purposefully, because Afrobeat is not just a bunch of guys jamming in a room. It is a highly specific, complex mathematical recipe.
It really is an architectural feat.
Collins breaks it down into 5 main ingredients in the notes. Let's explore how these interlocking pieces actually work, because it's fascinating.
So the first ingredient is the foundation we've already established. Highlife music.
Right.
The danceable, horn-heavy, big band sound that gives the music its joyous communal accessibility. It gets people on the floor.
Got it. And ingredient 2 is the American import, soul and funk. That James Brown rhythmic drive. The guitars stop playing strummed chords and start playing tight, scratchy, percussive rhythmic figures.
Exactly. Ingredient 3 is where his London jazz training finally finds its true purpose, modal jazz.
Okay, modal jazz. Explain that for us.
This is a critical technical shift. Western music, particularly pop and traditional jazz, relies on chord progressions. The song moves through a series of changing chords, creating tension, and eventually resolves back to the root chord.
Like a story with a beginning, middle, and end?
Yes. Fela abandons this entirely. He adopts the modal style pioneered by Miles Davis and John Coltrane. Modal jazz creates melodies by improvising around and moving between just 2 tones, or a single scale, often for an extended period.
Why does that matter for Afrobeat, though?
Because it removes the feeling of a song having a definite beginning, middle, and end. It creates a continuous, hypnotic, infinite groove. The music doesn't progress toward a finish line, it suspends you in a trance.
Oh, wow. Which perfectly complements ingredient 4, traditional Yoruba music.
Yeah.
Fela realized that modal jazz structures actually mimic the infinite loops of African traditional music.
Exactly.
He incorporates the call and response vocal structures of his youth. He utilizes pentatonic scales, which is a 5-note scale deeply common in West African folk music, as opposed to the 7-note Western diatonic scale.
But the most fascinating technical detail Collins points out is how Fela uses the bass guitar.
Oh, I love this part.
In Western rock or pop, the bass usually anchors the root note of the chord progression. But Fela told his bass players to mimic the tonal patterns of the massive Yoruba mother talking drum, known as the yalo.
Wait, how do you mimic a talking drum on a bass guitar?
Well, a talking drum has strings on the outside that the player squeezes to change the pitch, literally mimicking the tonal inflections of the Yoruba language. So in Afrobeat, the electric bass isn't just playing a musical foundation, it's practically speaking a traditional language in the background.
That is insane. It's so layered. Finally, ingredient 5, a Latin touch. Fela brought in salsa and Cuban percussion influences.
Which, again, is not an arbitrary choice.
Right. It has deep historical roots in Lagos, echoing the history of freed Brazilian slaves who had returned to Nigeria in the late 19th century and brought their samba and Latin rhythms with them.
To hold these 5 massive architectural pillars together, you need a rhythmic genius. And Fela found him in his drummer, Tony Allen.
Tony Allen is a legend.
Tony Allen is the engine of Afrobeat. He didn't just play a standard 4/4 dance beat on the snare and hi-hat. He played in a fluid, modern jazz style, hitting offbeat accents on the toms and cymbals. But his absolute signature was a specific double bass drum technique.
How does that work?
Instead of a steady thump, Allen would execute a rapid double kick on the bass pedal, just a 16th note apart, placed right at the beginning of the 4-bar measure.
So it's like a stutter.
Yes, it creates this explosive stutter step that propels the entire dense rhythm forward like a freight train.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. If you take all these ingredients, the modal jazz horns, the talking drum bass lines, Tony Allen's complex polyrhythms, and you strip away the lyrics, are we basically just listening to high-level avant-garde jazz?
Yes. Essentially, yes. And Fela knew that if he just stood on stage and played 15-minute avant-garde jazz instrumentals, the everyday working-class people of Lagos, the people he desperately wanted to reach with his new political message, would not connect with it.
It would be too abstract.
Way too abstract. He needed a grounding mechanism.
Enter the female dancers and singers. The chorus. This is the Trojan horse of Afrobeat.
Precisely. Fela deliberately hired women whose voices were not polished or classically trained. He had them sing simple, repetitive, easily digestible call-and-response chants.
Okay, so it gives the listener something to latch onto.
Exactly. This grounded the incredibly complex mathematical horn arrangements. It brought the stratosphere back down to the street level.
The irresistible groove and the simple chorus hook got the people moving and dancing. And then, once the entire club was locked into the trance, Fela would step to the microphone and deliver the political payload.
It was brilliant. With this new weaponized sound perfected, Fela radically alters his public persona. He renames his performance club in Lagos the Africa Shrine,
Making it like a temple.
turning it into a space of political, education, and spiritual communion, yeah. And acting on the philosophies he absorbed in Los Angeles, he drops his colonial surname, Ransom.
And what does he change it to?
He adopts the Yoruba name Anikulapo, which translates to he who carries death in his pouch.
He who holds death in his pocket.
Wow.
It is a statement of absolute terrifying fearlessness. And he's going to need every single ounce of that fearlessness because to understand the next phase of his life, we have to look at the socioeconomic backdrop of 1970s Nigeria.
The context here is absolutely vital. In the 1970s, Nigeria was experiencing a massive oil boom. Petrodollars were flooding into the country.
But I'm guessing everyone wasn't getting rich.
Oh, not at all. This wealth was not trickling down to the masses. It was being concentrated in the hands of a corrupt military elite and multinational corporations.
So massive inequality.
Extreme wealth disparity. On the streets of Lagos, you had military generals driving imported luxury cars right past sprawling, impoverished slums filled with people Fela affectionately called the sufferheads.
And Fela decides to become the voice of the sufferheads. He completely stops singing about love or dancing. He uses Afrobeat to directly, specifically attack the Nigerian government, the military dictatorship, and the greed of the oil boom.
He is singing about police brutality and governmental theft.
And the authorities, who are incredibly fragile despite all their wealth, cannot handle this level of insubordination.
No, the military government views Fela not just as a nuisance, but as a legitimate threat to state security. And they decide they must humiliate and silence him.
Which leads to April 1974, and one of the most bizarre, legendary standoffs in the history of music.
It really is.
The authorities order a raid on Fela's compound in Mushin. The police are ostensibly looking for drugs, specifically his beloved natural grass and runaway girls. They burst into his home. And Fela, knowing the Nigerian police are infamous for planting evidence.
Because they want to catch him holding cannabis to justify a long prison sentence.
Right. So he makes a split-second decision. He literally swallows the weed he has on him. He eats the evidence right in front of them.
Just swallowed it whole. And the police know exactly what he just did, but without physical evidence, they can't charge him.
So what do?
So they arrest him anyway and drag him to the CID, the Criminal Investigation Department headquarters at Alagbon Close. And the police devise a plan that is both deeply invasive and frankly, absurd.
I am absolutely astounded by the mechanics of this story every time I read it.
They lock him in a cell and decide to wait for his digestive system to process the cannabis. They're going to wait for him to pass the drugs in his feces, seize the stool sample, test it in a lab, and send him to prison.
It is a literal, state-sponsored gastrointestinal stakeout. They locked him in a communal holding cell with other prisoners. But the police miscalculated one crucial detail.
A very crucial detail.
They locked him in a cell with the very people who idolized him. The other prisoners are the sufferheads. They know exactly what the police are waiting for. So a conspiracy is formed inside the cell.
This is where it gets amazing.
Yeah.
Whenever it is time for Fela to use the communal bucket, his cellmates actively collude with him. They switch their uncontaminated feces with his.
So the CID scientists in the lab are running rigorous microscopic tests on these daily stool samples. Can you imagine being the lab tech?
Analyzing normal stool samples for days.
Yes. And every single one of them keeps coming back completely negative for cannabis.
The state exhausts its resources and its patience. They have no proof whatsoever. They are legally forced to release him.
And Fela, operating on a level of sheer, unparalleled audacity, doesn't just quietly go home and thank his lucky stars. He walks straight out of Alagbon Close, goes into the recording studio, and writes a massive chart-topping dance record mocking the entire police force for the ordeal.
The ultimate revenge.
He titles the album Expensive Shit.
The title is a direct taunt. He is laughing at the fact that the Nigerian police spent so much state money, time, and scientific resources literally examining his feces.
He turns a humiliating police stakeout into a global club banger. The sheer audacity of an artist doing that is unbelievable. But the psychological victory goes even further.
How suck.
Well, while he was locked up, the prisoners in that cell at Alagbon Close had nicknamed their holding pen the Kalakuta Republic. Kalakuta meaning rascal in Swahili. They jokingly elected Fela the president of the cell.
Ah, yes.
Upon his release, Fela adopts the name. He goes back to his compound in Lagos, paints Kalakuta Republic on the gates, and officially declares his home an independent sovereign state, completely separate from the laws of Nigeria.
This raises an important question regarding his creative process. How did Fela use confrontation as his creative fuel?
Right, because it wasn't just accidental.
No, because if you look at the landscape of famous protest singers, the methodology is usually very different. When Bob Dylan sings "The Times They Are A-Changin'" or Bob Marley sings about fighting Babylon, they are utilizing universal metaphors.
Right. Babylon could be the local police force. It could be Western capitalism. It could be a bad boss. It's an umbrella term.
Exactly. They're singing about abstract concepts of injustice that anyone, anywhere can relate to. Fela despised the umbrella. He didn't do abstract. He dealt in hyper-specific journalistic reality.
He named names.
He named specific police stations like Alagbon Close. He named specific military leaders like General Obasanjo, who he would later directly address in his devastating song, Coffin for Head of State. He named specific multinational corporations, like in the song ITT, where he attacks the International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation and its local Nigerian CEO for corruption.
And what's truly mind-boggling about his process is that the conflict wasn't a byproduct of his art. It was the raw material. If Fela was in a rut and lacked inspiration for a new song, he wouldn't go to a cabin in the woods to find his muse.
No, he'd pick a fight.
He would intentionally provoke the military authorities. He'd taunt them in the press, flaunt his independence, just to trigger a raid so he would have fresh material to write about. He actively sought out state violence to generate the art.
Which meant that by declaring the Kalakuta Republic a sovereign nation within a military dictatorship, extreme physical violence was literally always looming over the compound. It was a pressure cooker waiting to explode.
And this brings us back to John Collins.
Yes, our source author.
Collins literally finds himself directly in the crossfire of this escalating war. He provides us with a terrifying ground-level eyewitness account of the escalation that happened just a few months after the Expensive Shit incident in November 1974.
A very dark day.
Collins is staying at Fela's compound. He had traveled from Ghana, bringing some Ghanaian bands, Bossa Bossa and the Bunzoos, to record at the EMI studio in Lagos. EMI, of course, being Electric and Musical Industries, a major global record label.
Which shows that Fela was operating at the highest levels of the industry, even amidst this absolute chaos.
Right. They're sleeping at Fela's compound, the Africa Shrine.
Mm-hmm.
And early in the morning on November 23, they're abruptly woken up by the roar of an angry, mobilized crowd outside the gates.
Collins walks out to the balcony, looks down, and sees about 60 heavily armed riot police.
50.
60. They are equipped with combat helmets, riot shields, and they are literally taking axes to Fela's front door to chop their way into the Republic.
That is terrifying. And the trigger for this specific paramilitary raid is almost hard to believe. What started it?
Fela was harboring a runaway girl in the compound. She claimed she was 17, though it was later revealed she was actually 14. She had skipped school and run away from home because she desperately wanted to join Fela's band as a dancer.
And Fela took her in.
Fela, believing in the sovereignty of his compound, took her in. He offered her asylum.
But there was a massive problem with who this girl was, wasn't there?
The catastrophic problem was this specific teenager happened to be the daughter of Mr. Sulman,
Who is?
the Inspector General of Police for Lagos State.
Oh, wow. It is the ultimate collision of Fela's anti-authoritarian lifestyle and the literal authority of the state.
The Inspector General obviously demands his daughter back. Fela, acting as the president of Kalakuta, refuses to hand over a citizen who came to him for asylum.
So what happens?
So the police chief sends in a paramilitary squad with tear gas grenades to extract her.
The scene Collins describes is pure chaos. Collins and the Ghani musicians are choking on tear gas as the police storm the compound, smashing instruments and tearing the entire place apart. And Fela, being Fela, refuses to surrender.
He physically fights back against the riot police with his bare hands to prevent them from searching his bedroom.
With his bare hands against riot shields and axes, the physical toll is severe. Fela is brutally beaten by the riot squad. He suffers massive lacerations to his head that require 9 stitches. He is dragged out of the compound, bleeding, and thrown into a jail cell once again.
But again, the state's aggressive tactics fail in the courtroom. Fela's lawyers manage to beat the charges. He is acquitted in court and released just 3 days later on November 26th.
And this is the part of Collins's notes that absolutely astounds me. The juxtaposition of extreme physical trauma and immediate, unstoppable creative output. He gets tear-gassed, his house is axed down, he is savagely beaten, he gets stitches in his skull, he spends days in a filthy cell. And what is his immediate response the second he walks out of the prison gates?
He does not rest for a second. He goes straight back to work.
He immediately organizes and performs a massive concert with the Bossa Bossa and Bunzu's band. He gets up on stage playing the keyboards with one arm in a sling. He has a heavily bandaged head covering his stitches, which he then covers with a woven skullcap. And he jokingly tells the roaring crowd that it's his new Pope's hat.
The sense of humor amidst the violence is striking.
Then he goes directly into the EMI studio to help produce the Ghanaian band's albums. And, predictably, he immediately begins arranging a new Afrobeat song about getting beaten up by the riot squad.
Which becomes the title track for the album Kalakuta Show.
Exactly. This sequence of events is the ultimate testament to the psychology Fela had constructed. By the end of 1974, Fela had become a man who operated entirely outside the boundaries of normal societal fear.
Absolutely. By declaring the Kalakuta Republic, he wasn't just playing a character for the media. He wasn't executing a clever PR stunt to sell records. He genuinely believed in his own political sovereignty.
And the fascinating, deeply tragic irony of his life is that the more the Nigerian government deployed violence against him, the more mythic, untouchable, and powerful his status among the poor sufferheads of Lagos became.
Every beating he took validated his message. Every unjust arrest proved to the masses that he was telling the absolute truth about the regime's brutality. The state was inadvertently forging their own worst enemy.
So what does this all mean for us looking back at these incredible notes from John Collins? We started this deep dive looking at a clean-cut, suited-up, teetotaling jazz student who wouldn't touch a drop of alcohol and scolded his friends for lacking discipline.
Right, the perfect square.
And through a complex collision of his mother's political radicalism, a humbling failure to play bebop, a transformative awakening by the teachings of Malcolm X in America, and the creation of a massive new musical architecture, we end up with the bruised, bandaged, unbowed leader of the Kalakuta Republic.
Fela Kuti proved that music doesn't just have to be a reflection of society. It doesn't just have to be a mirror holding up a passive image of the world.
He proved that an artist can engineer music to be an active, combative force capable of shaking a heavily armed, oil-rich military regime to its absolute core.
It's a staggering, singular legacy in the history of global art.
Think about the music you listen to today. Think about the artists you follow, the ones who claim to be rebellious or pushing boundaries. Think about what they're actually risking for their art.
Here is something to mull over as we look at the legacy of Fela's literal physical warfare against the state. Fela utilized his physical body and his physical home to absorb the violence of an oppressive regime, turning his own blood, bruises, and even his bodily functions into chart-topping records.
Right.
The resistance required a physical location, the Kalakuta Republic, and it demanded a willingness to endure agonizing physical pain. Today, we live in a hyper-connected, entirely digital music industry.
Totally different world.
We have global streaming, algorithmic curation, and even AI-generated art that exists entirely in the cloud, unattached to any physical geography. If resistance in Fela's day required a physical compound to be axed down by riot police, what does genuine, dangerous, world-shifting musical rebellion even look like in an entirely digital world? How do you barricade the doors of a republic that only exists in the cloud?
Can a digital file ever hold the same terrifying revolutionary weight as a man playing a saxophone with stitches in his head? It's something to think about next time you hit play on a supposedly rebellious playlist.